Hi there, my name is Tyrone Thacker. I'm a First Nations man. I grew up in Lacombe-Panoka area. My ancestors are from the Saw Ridge Band up in Slave Lake. I'm working in the agriculture industry, providing on-farm services to various types of farmers around central Alberta. This has given me the opportunity to be exposed to new and innovative farming techniques that I would like to bring to you. On this show, each episode will feature a visit to one of these farms. We will visit Verge Permaculture. Permaculture is a relatively new agriculture practice focused on creating sustainable circular systems that will produce food for centuries. Farm 253 is another permaculture farm in the early stages of its design, being developed by Travis and Deanna Thiessen. They are focused on growing and raising their own food without synthetic fertilizers and chemicals, using traditional holistic methods. Perpelkin Farms is a mixed grain farm and cow-calf operation that focuses on growing all their own cattle feed. They are also part of a trial research program incorporating AI to help improve the quality of life of their cows during calving season. Steel Pony Farm is a high-output mixed vegetable farm that uses a subscription box program to feed their local population. They primarily harvest their produce by hand and pursue sustainability by utilizing local sources of compost to maintain soil health and productivity rather than synthetic fertilizers. Good Morning Honey is a large-scale honey operation in Alberta, focused on harvesting unpasteurized pure honey. Their operation involves thousands of hives, providing honey to markets in North America, Asia, and Europe. In each episode, we will learn what makes each farm unique and their long-term goals for sustainability. In this day and age, what's important to me is knowing where my food came from, how healthy it is, what my food is eating, and most of all, how it's being treated. The goal of this show is to highlight some of the innovative work that progressive farmers are pioneering in Alberta to develop long-term sustainability of local food sources. Today, we're at Verge Permaculture.
So the way that farming scales right now is that farmers will buy more and more land. They get bigger pieces of equipment with bigger engines so that they can reduce the labor cost ultimately and harvest more land with less people so that they can, their crops are less expensive to produce and they can get a slightly higher profit margin. But in permaculture, the scaling mechanism is by teaching more people. You get more and more people doing this. Essentially, more and more people taking responsibility for their life and that of their children, getting their house and garden in order. And if enough people grow food and retrofit their houses, the world will change. We can transform how we create habitat, and so really we need literally millions of people. Actually, there's about 3 million people on planet Earth right now practicing permaculture. It's called the silent revolution because you don't hear a lot about it. And that might seem a little naive, like how is growing little gardens going to transform the food system, as one example. And most people don't know this, but in World War II, there was a program that got developed in the United States called Victory Gardens. And the war was only about 4 years long, but by the second year, I believe, almost 50% of the food in the United States was being grown in Victory Gardens. These are backyard gardens where people were just doing exactly this to supplement the food supply. And so the government encouraged that because they realized that with all the people going off to war, there wasn't going to be enough labor to actually run all of the farms. So I love that example because it happened in a really short period of time. So people switched on really quickly. And it's no small feat to generate half of the calories of a country within a year just by using backyard gardens. And there's other examples like this happening right now. So in Belgium, there was an issue with the local municipality wanted to try and figure out how to reduce the amount of organic waste going into landfill to reduce carbon emissions and to also reduce the cost of hauling all this waste everywhere. And so they agreed to let the people within this city get 3 chickens per household. And they started feeding all of their compost, all the organic waste to these chickens. And the amount of organic waste went down to almost 0 for all the families that had these chickens. And the families that had chickens no longer bought eggs. So small actions multiplied over millions of people can have dramatic effects in very short periods of time. But you have to motivate people to do this. And so we can talk a little bit about what motivates somebody to grow these types of things. But for us, the food that we grow here is more nutrient dense than anything you can buy in the grocery store. It's not free because I have to put my labor into it. So you should, associate a labor cost. But you really cannot buy the food anywhere that I'm able to produce in this garden. I mean, I'm able to come out here and pick anything and eat it within just a couple of minutes of actually picking it. So your health is worth an enormous amount. And those are just a couple of the motivations that encourage us to do that. So in permaculture, we design everything through the lens of water, access, and structures. So water is central to life. And so one of the first elements that we design on a property, small or large, is the water system. Because if you don't have a water system, you can't grow plants, you can't keep animals alive. So on this particular property, one of the first things that we've done is we actually ran a pipeline from the bottom of our property all the way to the top of our property. And at the bottom, there's a solar pump that when the sun is shining, the pump turns on, it sends water up to about 8 to 10,000 gallons of tankage up at the top. I can't remember the exact volume right now. So that water gets stored at elevation and we can use it anywhere else that's below that with a variety of different valves and quick release fittings that we have. So those water points allow us to both irrigate as well as to hydrate livestock. And animals like cows and sheep and goats, they don't really like to walk very far for their water. And so if you've set up a pasture for those animals that's close to a creek, for example, which is what most farmers will do, the animals will stick pretty close to that water source. They've done research on this and they've shown that cows, for example, will walk about 200 feet away from where their water source is, which means that if you only have one water source on your farm, most of the grazing is going to occur within a 200-foot radius. So if we can set up more watering points on a property and we can distribute those evenly, then we can make sure that we have water in multiple locations so that we can get a much more even grazing distribution, which means we're going to get more manure distribution. We're not going to overgraze certain areas and stunt plants. And ultimately, it's going to improve the overall productivity of the pasture because we're moving those animals on a regular basis. And because we've put the extra effort in to lay down the infrastructure, moving those animals becomes quite easy. And so you can kind of break this down really, really easily here. Every element on a property either wants water or doesn't want it. Like a house doesn't want water. Roads don't want water. If you have too much water on a road, the road will erode away. Orchards and gardens, they want a certain amount of water. Ponds, they want lots of water. And so if you think about that, you can place every element onto a property based upon its desire to have or not have water. And then every element that you place on a property either generates water or stores water. And so a house roof will generate water. What do we do with that water? Well, we should put that rainwater to productive use, put it into a tank, put it into a pond. Roads, even though they don't want water, they generate water because they're water harvesting surfaces. So what do we do with that water? Well, we can put it into a ditch, we can direct that ditch into a pond, and then we've got water stored somewhere. And so with those two kind of ideas, that everything either generates water or gets rid of it, and everything either wants water or doesn't want it, and then we bring the zones piece into it, we can actually start to place every element onto a property into a really, really intelligent way to minimize the amount of work, to maximize the amount of productivity, and to enhance the overall ecosystem so that the entire health of the system actually increases, which ultimately serves the purpose of the designer because more diversity creates more stability creates more productivity. And so when you hear about all of these like droughts and floods, a really, really well managed property doesn't, like, droughts and floods are actually of the byproduct of poor design. So this is our solar pumping rig, and solar, being so inexpensive now, has opened up so many possibilities in farming. One of the big challenges that you have with being able to properly utilize the resources on a farm, like pasture, is making sure that you've got readily available water to livestock. Now, a lot of farmers will solve this, or land managers will solve this, by allowing their cattle to come down to the creek to be able to drink. But by doing that, you end up creating a lot of destruction in the riparian zone. It creates a lot of negative disturbance that's not good for the biodiversity. And so the better approach is to bring the water to the animals instead of having the animals come to the water. So if we can do a better job and bring the water to multiple locations on the farm, then we get better utilization of our pastures, which means we get fatter cows, we get more distribution of fertility. One of the main benefits of having cows is that they improve the fertility of the soil. Just like the chickens in our garden, cows on pasture can be very beneficial to the fertility of those grasslands. And by increasing the fertility of the grasslands, they store more carbon. More carbon in the soil means that they're able to harvest more water. For example, a 1% increase in soil organic matter will increase the water holding capacity by about 166,000 liters per hectare of land. So the solar panels produce direct current electricity, which feeds this wire right here. The pump itself is a direct current pump, and it can take anywhere from 48 volts to 400 volts. So the more of these panels we put together, the higher the voltage. The higher the voltage, the more head pressure the pump can produce, the higher we can pump the water. These three panels generate between 700 watts and a kilowatt of energy, depending upon how much sun is coming out of the sky and what angle we have them articulated to. And I'll show you how we can change the articulation of the panels here shortly. This pump sends the water to the top of the property on the other side and fills about 10,000 gallons worth of water. So during the day, this pump operates when the sun is going, filling those tanks up. And then at night, when the sun is not going, those tanks will remain full and give us access to pressurized water all across the farm. So this line is what the pump connects to, and it runs all the way up this path and then all the way up to the top of our property. The same line that we use to pump the water up to the property is the line that delivers the water to all of the different valves and outputs on our fields, which allows us to move our livestock watering systems many, many times over the course of the summer, making sure that our cows or whatever livestock is drinking out of it have really close proximity to water, so that we can properly manage the grazing system and not force the animals to walk too far to get water, so they can focus on getting fat and doing the job of creating disturbance on the pasture. So one of the things that you'll notice with this system, which could be different than other systems you've seen, is there's no batteries. And actually that's not entirely true. There's no chemical batteries. The battery in the system is actually the tanks at the top of the property. So we store the energy of the sun in water at elevation, which in itself is a form of energy. Some systems that have batteries rely on the battery as your energy storage as opposed to gravity. And we've chosen to use gravity because those tanks will last for 30 years. Most batteries might only last for 2 or 3. And so it's a very, very simple system to operate, and it will last for a very long time once it's set up. So because this system is so simple and it has no controls, the pump will send water up whenever there's sun. And the tank system that I have at the top of this property will fill up in probably less than a day. And so we actually have an overflow line on the tanks, and the overflow line comes down the property just past where the livestock corrals are. And we're gonna dump the overflow into a duck pond. And when that duck pond overflows, it's actually gonna overflow back into the beaver pond down below it. And so you can see that everything we do on this property is thought through from a circular perspective, in that we don't want any energy to go to waste. Whenever we have a surplus of energy, we either feed it to livestock, or we run, in this case, we run the surplus water back into another system, which will provide multiple other outputs. And so we're always thinking about the waste product of any system as a resource or opportunity for another system. So in permaculture, there is no waste, there's just an unused resource. So the pipe that we just looked at in the beaver pond comes underground here. You can actually see it's coming to the surface, so we're gonna have to dig it down a bit deeper. And it goes into the field. And then that pipe goes all the way down to my property boundary and all the way back up to the tanks, which we'll go see in a second. We've tried to place a valve at every single one of these birdhouses, and there's multiple birdhouses along the field. We can always see the birdhouses, which gives us an indication with regards to where we should be digging those valves out, which makes it really easy for us to put our livestock trough right behind it. So a couple things to notice here. This is one of our water outputs, so we can connect this to a livestock water or really any hose or fitting that has a camlock fitting on it. So that's a quick connect. We've welded in a T here, as well as a fitting that will go to an NPT fitting so we can screw things into it or thread things into it. Now this is close to the top of the property. The tanks are just behind the camera there. And there's about 1.5 kilometers of pipe on our property and about a 64-foot elevation gain from where the pump is up to here, which means that there's about a 30-pound pressure difference between the top and the bottom, meaning that at the bottom in that field there where the pump was, we'll have about 30 psi of pressure from these top tanks. So we place these on a regular spacing so that we've got lots of opportunity to create water situations for our livestock all the way along this pipe. And the same pipe that's used to deliver to the tanks, water to the tanks from the pump, is the same line that will bring water in the other direction. So the water can actually flow up and it can flow down. So let's go take a look at the tanks there and see how those are all set up. Okay, so these are the top 3 tanks. This is the line that comes from the pump. And so we have the ability to isolate that if we want to. So the water gets pumped up here into this tank. When this tank is full, and actually next year what we're gonna do is plumb all 3 of these tanks together. They're not plumbed together right now. The water will get up to here, at which point it will overflow down to where the chickens are down there, so that we can put that water to productive use again. And in the wintertime, what we do is we just turn the pump off, we open up the valves, and it's pretty good practice to actually bring an air compressor up here, and we'll just blow the line out. So we just put a bit of pressure in there, open the valve at the very bottom, and then the water will all drain out, and make sure that we don't get any big chunks of ice forming in there and causing a problem inside the pipe or breaking the pipe. There's ways that we can exist or create habitat that actually enhances the ecosystem around us. One really lovely example that I like to refer to are beavers. Beavers cut down trees, they dam creeks and sometimes small rivers. And as a result of that, they end up creating a bunch of what appears to be destruction, but they'll end up increasing the background biodiversity of that area by up to 30 times. Beavers are nature's engineers, and they're one of the animals that land managers love to hate because they will flood a pasture, they'll block a culvert, they'll block a creek, and this can disrupt the way that we manage land. The thing is though, is that we have to start looking at land for all of its resources, all of its benefits. And sometimes that means that it'll change the way that we operate or the way that we plan or design the property that we tend to look at. Beavers are a microcosm of disturbance because what they do is they'll move into an area, they cut down trees, and to some people that looks really negative, really destructive because they're bringing trees down that are so beautiful, and they'll drag those trees into a creek and they'll back up water. But as a result of their disturbance, as a result of them taking those trees down, they actually increase the background biodiversity of that ecosystem by 28 times. So to think about that differently, when a beaver is doing its work and when it's done, that ecosystem is close to 28 times more diverse than it was before the beaver got there. Now, in addition to that diversity increase, we have water resilience. So for a farmer or for a land manager, that means that we've got lots of water that we could potentially use to fight fires, maybe irrigate some crops, maybe water some cattle. Now, in addition to all those benefits, we also end up getting less erosion. It means that the water quality that ends up going into our lakes, that water quality increases. The volume of water and the ability for that creek to continue flowing year round also improves, because as the beavers are damming up these creeks, the water that sits behind those dams infiltrates into the side banks, which stores water so that as the rainfall drops throughout the year, we get less rain as we move into fall, that water can then leak out of those banks and continues to allow the creek to flow. And for me, beavers are basically like finding $1 million in your pocket. And when you come and see what's going on down here, you'll see why. So let's go take a look at some of the disturbance that these beavers have created and the abundance that abounds as a result of the actions that they're taking on this creek. So we've been here for about 4 years, and the previous owner was actively taking beavers out. We have not killed it or removed any beavers from the system. So at first glance, you'll see downed trees, you see dead trees in the background. I mean, clearly some serious activity has been going on here for a while. And so this is what ecologists refer to as disturbance. Now, to come back on that concept of disturbance, while it looks destructive, like I mentioned earlier, this beaver is actually attracting wildlife, attracting birds, because water is life. This is an inspiration to me because, well, it's easy to look at human activity as only being negative. We can see that animals like the beaver create disturbance, but they do it in a way that actually creates more abundance, more diversity, more fertility. And so if you believe that humans are of this earth, then we can actually use the incredible powers that we have to create disturbances in similar ways to beavers and actually make our ecosystems more productive, make them more inviting to wildlife, make them produce food that is more nutrient dense. This doesn't mean that we can't come down and utilize this space. As the water infiltrates into the banks, the grasses get more lush, and there's more forage. And so at certain times of the year, we're absolutely going to come down here and graze goats and sheep and a few dairy cows. And so we'll be able to coexist with those beavers and benefit from all the water harvesting that they're doing for us for free. And so if we can find economic ways of producing food and agricultural products on this land while working with the beavers, our hope is that we can inspire existing land managers and future generations to start changing their relationship to this species and hopefully many, many others. Dr. Glenys Hood from the University of Alberta has done enormous amounts of research on beavers, and she looked back into the past on aerial photos and found that the areas of Alberta that had the best, healthiest beaver populations were almost entirely drought-proof, meaning that land managers that worked with those species and with beaver activity were able to continue their operations irregardless of what was happening with rainfall in that particular season. So going forward, if we can inspire land managers right across this province, maybe even in North America, we can actually start to drought-proof our agricultural ecosystems. And ultimately, that's in our best interest as a species because all of our food comes from agriculture. Agriculture forms the basis of civilization. And so by changing that relationship, we can also change the resilience of our overall food system. And so when I'm struggling with a design problem or trying to understand how to help a client or design our farm or somebody else's, I come down here for inspiration. I come to see how the beavers manipulate their ecosystems and make them better.
One of the things I heard you mention was in permaculture, the role of the farmer is more as a manager of energy rather than a producer of food. Can you kind of dive down in that kind of thought process and explain what you specifically mean by that?
If you think about what a farm is basically a giant solar collector, except we're not using photovoltaics on that farm, we're using plants that photosynthesize. And so these plants basically take sunlight, they take nutrients from the soil, they take water, and they're able to convert that sunlight and the CO2 in the air into proteins, into carbohydrates. And so when we look at a farm, we're actually just looking at a giant solar collector. And the ability for that piece of land to produce is going to be based upon how effective that land manager is at managing that solar panel. Now, in a monoculture crop, you have one layer operating. And I cannot remember the percentages right now, but a monoculture is not able to capture all of the sunlight that hits it. And you can experience this by going into a forest like the one that's right behind us here. That forest will have about 6 layers inside of it. Some forests have as much as 8 layers inside of it. So you've got your overstory, your mid-story, your understory, your shrub layer, you can have a vine layer, you can have a herbaceous layer that's on the ground, you can have a root layer. And so all of these different layers are essentially different types of solar collectors that are optimized for existing in that canopy at different elevations. And so a forest, a really dense forest like the ones on the west coast of British Columbia, you can walk into some of those old growth forests on the island and it can feel almost, not quite like dusk almost, because so much of the light is being consumed by these plants. Whereas if you go into a farm field that has only one layer, you get sunburn because there's just not a lot of canopy consuming that. And so the difference between a permaculture system and a conventional agriculture system is that we're trying to maximize the number of layers that exist in any system in order to capture as much of that solar energy as possible. And by doing that, we're able to get more productivity out of a smaller space. But there's other interesting things that happen when we get more species into a small space. There's things called quorum sensing. And so when you get 8 plants in one little area, there's network effects that actually occur between those plants because they get connected by fungi. And so you'll get more productivity out of a space with more species than you do out of an area with just one species. So when you're looking at this garden, if you're new to gardening or if you are kind of more of a traditional gardener, you would probably look at this plantscape and say, this is a complete mess. You know, we don't have black dirt paths. We've got plants everywhere. Every bed's got multiple species in it. It'd be difficult for you to look at this and say that's beautiful if you're coming from a kind of traditional gardening lens. And but what's going on in this garden is actually there's a lot of information here. There's lots going on. And so if you change the lens a little bit with regards to how you look at it, it will open your mind to a new way of appreciating nature. So when you go into a forest, like an old growth forest, like the ones we have on this property here, most of the forest we have here has never been cut down. There's stuff everywhere. There's multiple layers all over the place. There's grasses, there's shrubs, there's ground covers, there's mid-story trees, there's overstory trees, and everything just seems to be in this random pattern. And yet we go in there and we say, wow, this is really beautiful, and it's super complex. Like, how did this forest evolve to be this way? But yet you'll come into a garden and you'll say, well, even though it's kind of set up in a similar way, it looks like a mess. So the one thing that this garden has in common with a forest, there's lots that it has in common, but the one thing that I think is worth double clicking on is that the guiding principle of this garden is to maximize solar gain. And we can say it even simpler than that. A gentleman named Dr. Howard Odom came up with a principle that describes what nature is trying to aim at. And we can use that principle in the way that we think about how we design our cultivated landscapes. And that principle is called the maximum power principle. And he proposed it as the 4th law of thermodynamics. And so you think about what drives a forest, what drives a native prairie, what drives an intact ecosystem. Those ecosystems are trying to capture the most amount of resources possible, specifically sunlight, because sunlight drives everything. It's the engine of the planet, is the sun. And so forests will, and trees and shrubs and all the plants that exist within a forest will, through a whole bunch of chaos and a whole bunch of trial and error, orient themselves to make sure that every niche and resource is filled. And so we go into those systems and learn how they do them, and then we bring some of those learnings into the way that we operate our gardens. And so the way that we set up our orchards, our annual gardens, and even how we get the animals to interact are just patterns that we observe from the natural world that we transport into the way that we meet our needs.
Love it. One topic I want to hit on, just could you describe to us, I believe I heard you mention that there's 5 zones of permaculture.
Yep.
So when you start designing your permaculture, you call it a farm?
Yep.
Explain to us what those 5 zones are, and talk a little briefly about each one of them.
So we use this concept of zoning in permaculture to place elements relative to their frequency of use. So zone 1 elements, like a garden, are really close to your house. Zone 4 elements, like a pasture, are really far away from the house. And it's all about trying to create really efficient workflows. So when it comes down to the design of a permaculture system, we think about a few different tools that help us to make really efficient landscapes. One of the principles that we think about a lot is this concept that work is just a failure in design. So we use zones to think about where we should place specific elements that we visit at a specific frequency. So if I'm constantly going out to my garden every day, which I do, I want my garden to be really close to my house. If I'm going to visit my chickens, I probably don't want them right next to my house because they're a little bit noisy and sometimes their manure smells a little bit, but I also don't want it to be on the other side of my farm. And ideally, my chickens should be close enough that I can actually bring them into my garden to do work for me at certain times of the year. And so every element in a permaculture system can be thought about whether it should be close to your center of energy or further away from your center of energy. So zone 1 is really close, zone 4 is quite far away, and then zone 5 is the natural area that we don't do any management to. And so we'll actually go into our zone 5 for inspiration to look for patterns that we can bring into our zones 1 through 4. In permaculture, we talk a lot about getting our zones right. And so there's 5 zones in permaculture. Zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 is basically the wild part of the property where we do very little other than observing how nature works. And we take those lessons from nature and we bring them into the way that we do things in our zones 1 through 4. Zone 1 is the zone closest to our house where we have the most ability to influence what's going on in that particular zone. And so right now I'm standing in our garden, which is about 1/4 of an acre. And so this is one of the first systems that we put together on this particular farm because we wanted to be able to produce a large amount of our vegetables. And this garden is quite unique because we're bringing together components of regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and market gardening all into one system, which not too many people that I'm aware of do. So the construction of our farm is probably going to take us about 10 years until it's completely done. And this is because both Michelle and I are working full-time. We've got 2 kids, which we homeschool. And so we can only fit the construction projects in as we have time and resources available to us. So while zone 1 is all about kind of our primary garden production and our greenhouse and everything that goes on inside of our home, as we get further out onto the property, zone 2, 3, and 4 are generally filled with systems that take a little bit less time to manage, and generally we have to go to those systems less often. And so our corrals would be in zone 2, our food forest or orchards will be in zone 2, and our primary grazing will be in zone 3. And then if we choose to graze our forests or send livestock out into our forests, that would be considered our zone 4. A well-designed farm is going to think about the labor that goes into managing it in the same way. And so we want to place things in relative location to each other to minimize work. And so in permaculture, we have a saying that work is just a failure in design. And if you're doing a heck of a lot of work, there's usually an opportunity to optimize how the design is set up. let's have a peek at the garden and talk a little bit about how we're synergizing a bunch of different types of systems into one place where we can grow food. So at first glance, this garden, it looks very different than most people's gardens. It looks messy. It looks like there's plants everywhere. And so if you're used to like really clean rows and black dirt pathways, that's not what you're gonna find in this garden. This garden brings together market gardening, permaculture, and regenerative agriculture. So let's talk about why and how those three things come together and what makes each of them unique and why they might be a match made in heaven. So in market gardening, the goal is to make really efficient gardens. And so all the tools in a market gardening toolbox typically are based on 30-inch beds, so that our rototillers are 30 inches wide. We can use seeders that work within that 30-inch bed. And 30 inches is basically an ergonomic size that a human can utilize in order to have really efficient planting, management, and harvesting. So all of our beds are 30 inches. And then because of that, we use a bunch of those market gardening tools to make the installation and management of these beds really, really efficient. And I can't speak highly enough for what's going on in the market gardening movement, because there are all these incredible innovators out there that are building new tools and processes to produce nutrient-dense food at scale. It's amazing. Now, in regenerative agriculture, they have a couple of basic guidelines that they use to try and determine if something's regenerative or not. And a lot of it has to come down to how plants photosynthesize. And so they've got a couple of basic rules, which is that you should never have any bare soil. So wherever possible, we try and maintain soil coverage at all times, either with mulch, like you can see over here. And so we've got mulch on the ground, which is protecting the soil. And if you look right underneath the soil there, it's moist. It's got really nice crumb characteristics. And so the sun is not hitting that soil. And look at that, there's a worm right there. And the reason the worm is there is because he's not getting sunburnt. So we either have mulch, or we have a living mulch or a cover crop. And even though this looks like there's only one species in here right now, we planted this at the beginning of the year with a 15-way cover crop mix, which are all based out of annuals. And so we have a 30-inch bed for our vegetables. We have 30-inch pathways that we're growing cover crop in. Now these cover crops are actively building soil for us. There's some interesting research that some soil scientists have uncovered that when you have more than 7 to 9 species in a small community, a small area, you get something called quorum sensing happening between the plants. And what that basically means is that the plants are able to detect that they have buddies next to them. And there's a step change in productivity and carbon storage that occurs in the soil when quorum sensing starts to occur. And it steps up even larger once we get to 18 or 19 species. And so half of our garden is in garden bed, and because our pathways are the same width as our garden beds, half of them are in cover crop. So we always have 50% of our garden in soil creation mode. And over a long enough period of time, we're going to see huge improvements in the microbes that exist within the soil, all of the critters like the worms and the arthropods that are crawling on the surface or just below the surface. And so these are basically actively giving back and building our topsoils. And if we dig into these pathways, what we'll find is that, again, we've got really beautiful topsoil being built here, and we can show like what the soils look like. Look at that beautiful worm right there. So that's a really good sign. This is like the tiger in the jungle. When you have one worm, you know that you've got really healthy microbial soils. There's that worm. There's another worm there. 2 worms in one small little scoop. 3 worms. You know, as we dig this, like, look at the beautiful friability of this soil, and you can see how the roots are actively structuring it there. There's another worm there, just like absolutely teeming with life. One thing that you can look at too to see how healthy your soil is you can look for something called Rastafarian roots. And so these are roots that look like
dreadlocks, and you can start seeing the formation of these Rastafarian roots right here. You can see how the soil is coating the roots there, and so that's where the majority of the microbes live in the soil. So by having lots of plants here, it's all of these microbes on these roots, as well as the exudates that are being produced through photosynthesis that are injecting that carbon back into the soil, which is what makes the soil healthy and ultimately gives us nutrient-dense plants like this celery right here. So in Regen Ag, we always want to have the soil covered, which is why we have living pathways. And we use multiple species because different species will photosynthesize differently at different times of the year. So plants are generally broken up into their cool season as well as their warm season crops. And so grasses, not all of them, but a lot of the grasses that we use in here tend to be cool season, so they photosynthesize better in the spring and in the fall. And then if you look at this, looks like corn, but it's actually Sudan grass. This is a warm season grass, and so it photosynthesizes better in the middle of the summer. And so you have different photosynthetic optimization occurring based upon the heat in the ecosystem at a specific period of time. And that makes sure that we're getting the maximum amount of carbon into our soils. So we have continuous live root, we've got biodiversity, we've got soil coverage, and then eventually we're gonna actually have animals in here as well. And so we've actually got about 35 chickens. Those chickens will come into this garden at the end of the season. We'll fence them in, and then they're gonna eat all of the vegetative matter and scratch it down and manure it, which will then prepare the garden for next spring. And so that brings in the regenerative agriculture component into our garden. And then lastly, in permaculture, it's all about copying nature. And so you'll find that all of our gardens have got multiple species all over the place. And so we're actually bringing the concepts of diversity into how we are putting our broccoli next to our celery and putting our broccoli next to even kale. So some kale right here. And so we have plant communities in each one of our beds, which bring that concept of diversity, which we can see pretty clearly in our forests, into the way that we actually grow our food. And so that's how we bring permaculture, regen ag, and market gardening into one space. So let's go check out one of our more successful cover crops. We have a whole section dedicated to cover crop, and we'll talk a little bit about the different species as well as how they're actually benefiting the soil and possibly how you could bring this into what you do within your garden, even if it's really small. Just to my left here, we've got another cover crop recipe. And so last year we actually built about 5 different cover crop recipes and planted them in different parts of the farm to see how they responded. And this was one of the winning ones. Some of the other ones had perennials in there, and everything we do in our annual garden, we try and keep them annual cover crops so that we're not ending up with plants growing in here that are competing against the other annuals. And so in this cover crop mix, we've got oats, rye, sunflower, kale, turnip, ryegrass. I think I already said rye. I think we've got some wheatgrass in here. We've got mustard. I think we have 2 species of sunflower, and there's a few others there that I'm missing as well. And we love growing sunflowers, 1, because they're really, really prolific. 2, they're a fantastic pollinator crop, so they bring a lot of bees onto the property, which is great for pollinating some of our other species. 3, they're really beautiful, and if you've got a child that wants to start a small business, or if you want to start a small business, usually you can sell these to flower shops for $2 or $3 a head, which we don't do. Another benefit of sunflowers that people don't often think about is that once they actually set seed, birds will come in here and start to consume the seeds, which is fantastic because birds usually bring with them really phosphorus-rich manure. And so birds will literally perch up on one of the sunflowers, consume the seeds, and then they'll defecate right where they're eating the seeds. And it's a little bit early right now. The seeds haven't quite emerged from these sunflowers yet. But one of the limiting factors in a garden is phosphorus. And so if we can attract the animals in, or the species in, that actually bring the phosphorus with them, it's another resource that I don't have to buy because I can just bring it in from the local resources. Whatever the birds don't consume, the chickens will. And so I'm actively also growing my chicken forage for my fall season. And realistically, like, I just buy sunflowers from the local bird store
in like 40 or 50 pound bags, I could plant entire fields out with this exact cover crop mix and grow the majority of my chicken feed literally in my backyard that my chickens could then consume all winter long. And so it's a little bit of an experiment with this cover crop here in that we're trying different species out, but it's also creating a huge amount of benefit for the garden. Right beside the cover crop, we've got beets. This is honestly one of the best beet crops I've ever grown. I cannot believe how many and how big these beets are. We've literally been thinning these out now for about a month. And I mean, that's a small one. There's some really, really huge beets that are growing in the garden, and almost nothing tastes better than fresh beets. Right next to me here are carrots. Both the beets and the carrots do really well in our cold climate. They seem to like the cool nights. All of the hot season crops that we grow, the majority of them happen inside of our passive solar greenhouse. And so this garden is just absolutely loaded with carrots. And beside us, we've got an incredible potato crop, and we'll dig up one of those potatoes and see what comes out from underneath one of them. Probably one of the best potato crops we've grown as well. Let's dig inside this cover crop and see what we can find. So let's have a peek in here. So you can see there's a lot of different diversity. There's lots of litter on the ground. We even got some slugs going on there, so the chickens are gonna love this when they finally come in here. Like, you literally have to kind of dig the material away in order to see what's going on here, which is a good sign because it means that the soil is being protected from the sun. And so you can see here's the original subsoil layer. There's still quite a bit of compaction in there, so we're gonna have to work on that over the coming years, but it's not super tight. Like, it's actually starting to break apart, and you can see there's roots coming through there, so the plants are starting to do their magic. In 4 or 5 years from now, this will be this chocolatey soil that we're starting to see forming on the surface right now, which is really cool. And so really topsoil, which is what we want, is the byproduct of subsoils plus a whole bunch of life and carbon. And when we built this garden, we knew that it was going to take some time in order to build the topsoils that we want. And so we're definitely seeing that formation happening. It's going to take more time for the benefit to come down there. But you can see there's so much aggregation and room for critters. It's like to move around in here. It's really light and fluffy, lots of oxygen, it's moist. And so it's just really moving in the right direction. We can even see some fungi forming here, which is a really good sign. Fungi is really important to connect the plant roots together. If you have any kind of nutrient deficiency in your garden, it could literally just be that there's a lack of fungi. Fungi is one of the first species to disappear when we start tilling our garden, especially when we till it deeply. And so the fact that we're starting to see fungi in here is a really great sign. There's this idea in permaculture that waste is just an unused resource. And every time you have a waste product, you have an opportunity for a new cycle or niche. And there's another way of saying it as well, which is that you don't have a grasshopper problem, you have a chicken opportunity, because chickens like to eat grasshoppers. And so when we start looking at things through the lens of problems, and we don't turn that problem into a solution, we end up using approaches that are not really great for us, and they're not great for the environment. So the grasshopper could be solved by spraying a pesticide, or it could be solved by bringing chickens or ducks into a situation where they can actually turn those grasshoppers into eggs. Now the problem with that on a large scale property is that it takes a lot of labor to manage those types of things. It's way easier and less expensive to use a chemical solution than it is to use a biological solution. But we look at that circularity not just in the way that we grow our food, but also how we build our houses, how we manage our wastewater. So one example of that is that this garden used to be a little mini forest. We needed the sunlight to heat our home, we needed the sunlight to grow our food, and so we actually cut those trees down, we milled them, and we've now turned it into additions on our home. And so we're using the very trees that came off of the property in a very productive way. So we try and always look at every output of a system as the input of another system. Permaculture is really focused on using patterns, as we've kind of talked about. So going into nature, observing things, and then bringing them back into the way that we do things. When we're able to look at things through a pattern lens, we're able to bring incredible amounts of information into the way that we design and manage our properties. Let me give you a couple of examples. So one of the predominant trees out here is the black poplar. And the black poplar has been here for thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of years. And it knows more about this ecosystem than I ever will. And the black poplar, when it first starts to bud out in the springtime, will only bud out after the last frost. So when we're trying to plant our garden, we use techniques to plant this garden. We can't just go and plant stuff whenever we want to. We actually have to strategize when we plant that garden, because if you plant it at the wrong time, then you'll end up hitting a frost, and all the work that you've done will end up going to waste. So you have to know how to plant it and when to plant it. So the technique is how and the when is a strategy, but then we use patterns that we can observe in nature in order to inform the first two. So as soon as the black poplar bud has sprouted in the springtime, we know that there's almost no chance that there's going to be a frost after that. So another pattern that I pay a lot of attention to are the 6 to 8 beaver families that we have living in our 2 creeks at any given time. So beavers, during the summer, they'll graze the grass. That's what they eat. They cut down some trees in order to build their dams and their lodges, but they tend to like a really specific size of tree for eating, because the beavers will actually consume the cambium layer, which is the green layer right underneath the bark of the black poplar. And one of the reasons that they build the dam in the first place and flood those floodplains is that the water freezes over in the wintertime, and it covers their food store. And so they actually store these little tiny tree saplings in the mud, which they then harvest all winter long in order to have enough food to eat. So they're actually managing a larder. They will start storing their food about 2 to 3 weeks before the ice freezes over on the creek. And so when you start observing them storing food in the water, you know winter is about 2 to 3 weeks away. So you better clean up all your tools. And so nature is full of these indicators. And if we just have the humility and the ability to quiet our minds and go out into nature and observe what's going on, just like you did the other day with the chickens, we can look at these behaviors, we can look at these patterns that exist, and then figure out how to change or transform our techniques, or potentially how to do those techniques at different times or in different ways in order to bring the information from nature into the way that we create our own habitat. Farmers are very adept at looking at patterns. They remember things, they have really good memories, and they can remember what's happened in previous years, and then they'll apply those ideas to future years.
So since you started practicing permaculture, what have you learned over the years that have helped you become even better at reaching the goals that you have?
So permaculture properties can be really dynamic places, because we tend to have lots of different types of systems. We've got annual gardens, we've got orchards, you typically have livestock, and you're trying to, you're basically a matchmaker. You're trying to figure out how all these systems work together. And so how the livestock enhance the garden, how the garden enhances the orchard, how the orchard enhances the garden. All of these things have needs and yields. But because it's so dynamic, and because you're basically just a systems designer, you can rapidly get overwhelmed. And so we have a rule that we talk about where you can only do 2 out of the 5 Bs at any given point in your life. So the 5 Bs are babies, businesses, beasts, bushes, and buildings. And so every single one of those things, like chickens, for example, you need to manage them every day. You need to bring them water. If you don't have an automatic waterer, you got to feed them, you got to protect them. Buildings take an enormous amount of energy to build, and you have to be on it. In our cold climate, you have a very short building season, so you have to be on that. Businesses take an enormous amount of effort to manage. When you're first establishing trees or bushes, they take an enormous amount of energy to make sure the deer aren't eating them, to make sure they're irrigated and protected. And babies, if you're raising a family, is an enormous amount of takes an enormous amount of time. And so if you're doing more than 2 of those things, you're probably going to either something will die, hopefully not your baby, and usually what happens is you end up having relational issues because you can only do so many things in a day. So when we bought this property, we knew that this was going to take a lot of our time to build it out. And so we've really set our goal at having a 5 to 10 year build out so that we're not overwhelming ourselves. So what's made me a better designer is making sure that I'm not taking on too much at a time. All of these systems require energy and time to manage. Every time that I've taken on too much on this particular property, something suffers. So that's probably one of the biggest things. Another one, I'm super blessed to have such a huge forest and all these nature spaces. And so I spend a lot of time out in those spaces. And I think that no matter how much time I spend in the forest or in natural spaces, there's always more to learn. And the reality is that a lot of the learning actually comes from doing. And so by being out in the garden, trying new experiments constantly and making sure that you document them, you continually improve. And so permaculture is not something that you can just take a course and then, you're good at it. It's kind of like a martial art. You have to constantly be practicing it, constantly be trying new things. That's really where your knowledge comes from. And every time you have a failure, it's just an opportunity to learn and to make modifications and manipulations of the system in order to make it work better.
If you're having advice for people that are going to dive into permaculture, what advice would you give them?
So for people that are first starting, one of the worst things you can do is to start a really, really big system. And it's usually men that struggle with this more than women. Women are usually a little bit more humble when it comes to kind of starting something new. It's much better to have small successes, like lots of small successes, than to have a massive failure. And so regardless of whether you're starting with livestock or a garden or a building retrofit, it's much, much better to start really small and kind of work out the kinks before you scale it up.
Is permaculture something that you need a lot of space to do? Or if I'm living in a high rise in downtown Calgary, I'm super inspired by this, can I practice permaculture in an apartment? In a small space?
Yeah, so you can be doing this in a super small space or a really, really large space. Permaculture is just a design system. It's kind of like engineering. It's a systems design approach to meeting human habitat. So we can do it wherever we are. If you're living in an apartment, you can start a little apartment garden. You can find ways of composting. There's lots of different composting systems. You can compost your food scraps in your apartment using bokashi or worm systems. You can participate in a solar cooperative. So maybe you can't put solar panels on your roof, but you could be part of a cooperative where people jointly own part of a solar farm somewhere else outside of the city. You can buy your food locally from grass-fed beef farmers. And so all of these things have to do with figuring out how we can coexist on this planet and not even just minimize the impact, but optimize it. Make it positive. Some of the best permaculture properties in the world are actually urban lots. An urban lot, you can harvest all of the rainwater coming off of your roof. You can turn your front lawn, which is an energy consuming element, into a food forest. So now you've got an orchard on your front yard. You can put a garden into your backyard. You can put a greenhouse into your backyard. You can cover your roof with solar panels. We really can make these properties that are energy consuming and destructive into regenerative properties that are able to actually contribute to the spaces around us. There's a great series that Bill Mollison put together called The Global Gardener. And he actually goes through all of the different scales of permaculture. And so one of them is actually like a small little apartment. There's like a city-sized lot, and then all the way up to a farm. And that was done almost 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Some great examples in there.
Nice.
So if somebody's really interested in getting into permaculture, there's a ton of resources on the internet. When I started, there was almost nothing. And so YouTube is a great resource. I think I have up to 800 videos now on our YouTube channel. A permaculture design course is a fantastic thing to go take. There's a few companies offering intro courses out there. that kind of will give you a bit of a taste tester before you dive into the full 72-hour experience. But if you do get quite interested in it, that is kind of the gold standard, so to speak, to kind of get into permaculture. It's a lifelong journey. It's not something you just take a course and then check it off your list and you're done with it. You won't get the benefit out of permaculture if you just take a course and kind of end with it there. Some of the benefits that I've observed as a result of adopting permaculture ideas into the way that I live is I've never been healthier. I mean, I get so much nutrient-dense food out of these systems. On this particular farm right now, the only livestock we have are chickens. So the chickens give me eggs, they give me meat, they provide me with labor, and then I also get manure from them. And so all the manure that I get ends up making my plants that much healthier. We've been able to raise our children in a way that is just, it's beautiful. I mean, the kids spend most of their time in nature. They've grown up around gardens. They know where food comes from. They know what real food tastes like. Both of my kids are so healthy as a result of this incredible food that they get to eat 3 times a day. My mental well-being has never been better. Because I have hope again, and it's not false hope. I've seen ecosystems come back from the brink as a result of doing really, really simple techniques, both on the small scale and on the large scale. And so I no longer believe that humans only have one way of operating. I know that we can be just as positive as we are negative. And then for every dollar that I have in the bank, I have 10,000 in relationships. We've taught thousands of students right across the planet how to do permaculture, and that's been one of the most inspiring things over the last 15 years for me. It's just all the amazing people that take these ideas and this inspiration and they go out and do it on their own. So I think it's really important to know a little bit about how our brains work. And we have really big, pernicious, complex, Gordian knot type problems on this planet. And people get really overwhelmed by things like climate change or peak oil or any of these things. And because of our 24-hour news cycle, and because of the fact that we're much more focused on fear as opposed to hope, if you're watching all of those negative things, they've actually shown that your prefrontal cortex, which is the design part or the thinking part of your brain, literally shuts off, and the blood starts flowing to the back of your brain, the croc brain, which is the part of your brain that's supposed to be there to run away from the saber-toothed tiger so that you can survive. We have got to get out of survival thinking, and we've got to start getting into optimistic thinking. And so turn off the media, turn off the negative media, start seeking people that are actually creating solutions. And by studying concepts like permaculture and regenerative agriculture, regenerative living, what you start realizing is that the solutions to all of these massive Gordian knots is actually solved by individual life decisions that are multiplied over millions of times. When we solve these big problems with centralized solutions, we end up eventually in tyranny. These big problems create big governments, and big governments don't always necessarily make the decisions that are best for you. When you start taking responsibility for your actions and that of your children, you start supplying yourself with some of your food, you start harvesting your own energy, you start getting your house in order so that it doesn't require huge amounts of money to operate all the time. That's freedom. That's what we're going after. And the way to get more people into this is not to scare the living crap out of them. People are attracted, like bees. Bees are attracted to honey, not to vinegar. And so we can't just live on our own little islands of self-sufficiency. We actually have to invite people in here. And one of the best ways to inspire people to create these changes is to actually feed them an incredible meal, to have a great conversation. We have got to make this more fun. We've got to make this more optimistic. And by doing that, we never have to tell anybody to do anything. They'll be naturally attracted to it because it's just a better way to live. I'm not doing this out of fear. I'm doing this out of hope, out of a desire to inspire other people. and because it's just a better way for me to live my life.